Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Cristina Stefanelli. I'm the project manager for OpenMed at UniMed, the Mediterranean Universities Union. Today we are presenting open licensing in the Erasmus capacity building in higher education project, presented by wonderful Cable Green, Director of Open Education at Creative Commons. This webinar is organized by OpenMed and it is hosted by our partner UNIR, Universidad Internacional de La Rioja. Thank you again, UNIR. Hospitality for muting the microphone and for all the support with the webinar. This webinar targets the Erasmus Staff Capacity Building Project Partner and Coordinator in the South Mediterranean region, and it is, of course, open to everyone. We had more than 100 of registered participants, and many of them are joining from more than 20 countries. So for those who will not be able to join the recorded webinar, will be available on OpenMed website. It would be really great to mute all the microphones. Thank you. So most of you are involved in one or more or even too much Erasmus Staff project. So I hope this webinar will be really useful for opening up the results of your project. It would be also great if you can introduce yourself, typing your name and institution in the chat box here below.
Can you ask for other to mute their microphone because there's an echo in the sound? Okay. Thanks.
Yes. That is. Okay. Yeah, there are a few microphones open. Okay, just a few words about UniMed and OpenMed before we get started. As many of you know, UniMed is a network of 112 universities and research centers focused on promoting Euro-Mediterranean academic cooperation. We are based in Rome, in Italy, and we also have regional offices in Morocco, Palestine, France, and Portugal. And among many things, we coordinate the OpenMed project. OpenMed stands for Opening Up Education in South Mediterranean Countries. It is an Erasmus Plus project in 2015. The overarching goal of OpenMed is to raise awareness and facilitate the adoption of open educational resources and open educational practices in the South Mediterranean region, and in particular in higher education in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Palestine. During the project, we have done research analysis, we have organized strategy forums, and most importantly, we have developed an online course on open education, which includes a module on open licensing. So for those of you who are interested in taking a course, which is now available in English, French, and Arabic. The course is, of course, CC licensed with a CC BY license, so everyone can reuse, adapt it in their own context. So after this bit of promotion of our project and of course, a little housekeeping before we get started. As I've mentioned before, the webinar will be recorded and it will be available on the OpenMed website. If you have questions during the webinar, during the presentation, you can type them in the question box, which I think is here below. And Javiera and myself will bring them up during the presentation, and we will have time for discussion at the end. Now we can turn the time over to Cable. Cable Green, as I mentioned before, and as probably many of you already know, is the fantastic director of Open Education at Creative Commons, which is a non-profit organization which provides the well-known suite for open licenses. Cable, as well as being one of the most collaborative and supportive experts that we have met along our OpenNet project, is a leading advocate for open licensing policies that ensure that educational materials funded by public funds are freely available for everyone. Cable, thank you very much again for being here.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and it's nice to see everybody. If anybody's having a problem with muting their mic, Adobe Connect is new to me as well. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see a little speaker icon, and then to the right of it, a microphone icon. You can leave your speaker on so you can hear, and then if you click once on the microphone, it will have a cross through it, or a slash through it, and that will mute your microphone. And that should make it so that we don't hear noise while we're talking. And then when we get to the question and answer, people can unmute their microphones and ask. So thank you, everybody, for doing that. It'll make it easier to hear. First, here is my contact information. If you would like to ask more questions or speak directly to Creative Commons, happy to talk to you. There's my email, and the @cgreen is that's my Twitter handle. So if you do Twitter or other social media, I'm @cgreen. Of course, all of these slides are under an open license. You may use them, download them. We'll make sure that everybody that attends receives a copy of the slides in an editable format so that you can make use of these if that's helpful. So before we get into the licensing requirement on the Erasmus Plus grants or talk about open licensing, I always like to start with, why are we having this conversation in the first place? So I, like all of you, I'm an educator. I've always been in education. I've always worked in education. And education is fundamentally about sharing. We share knowledge, we share research, data, we share of ourselves when we're teaching, and we help to mentor others. And the best teachers are usually the best sharers. And of course, today we can share at an unprecedented capacity with cheap disk space, with mobile phones, with the internet, with the ability to make an educational resource in digital format once and then share it with everybody on the planet that can access that digital file. We can share in a way that we could never share before, and for educators, that's very exciting, except that we can't. And the reason we can't always is that some of the educational resources and research resources that we want to use in our classrooms, in our degree programs, at our institutions, are all rights reserved copyright. And so around the world, when somebody creates a new work, it's protected by copyright. And that copyright is protected in countries around the world. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with all rights reserved copyright. If people don't want to share, they don't have to share. And so that's a personal choice. We'll talk about the exception to that is when a funder requires you to share, like the Erasmus Plus grants do, but we'll get to that in a moment. So we have this unprecedented capacity to share. The internet is enabling us to produce a video or a textbook or in some cases an entire degree program and share it with everybody else on the planet for the marginal cost of zero. But copyright, to the extent those resources are copyright, forbids that sharing. We're not allowed to make a copy of copyrighted resources without explicit permission. So a lot of times, so we get hung up on that point. We'll come back to that in a minute. a lot of times people ask, well, isn't free the same as open? I find resources on the internet all the time that are free to access. Aren't those open educational resources? And in fact, they're not. So free is good, but free is not the same as open. Open is not free or precarious or rigid. So by precarious, I mean somebody could take away the resource. So you might find a really wonderful resource on the internet that's freely available, but if it's not open, if it doesn't have an open license on it, then you may not have the legal rights to keep it forever. Sometimes things on the internet are rigid, meaning you can't modify them. You can't change them to meet your needs. A good example would be most YouTube videos. YouTube makes it very difficult to download or edit those videos, and so they're very rigid. You can't modify them to meet your needs. So when we talk about open, we're really talking about permissions. We're talking about giving other educators, other researchers, other students around the world the permissions, the legal rights that they need to do to the work what they need to do. So it might be that I want to take an educational resource and make it shorter. Or maybe I don't like the order of it and I want to change it. Maybe I need to translate it into a new language. Maybe I want parts of it and I want to take some of my work and some of Javier's work and remix it together into something new. And I need permissions to do those things. So one way to think about the permissions is to think about what David Wiley has coined the 5 R's. And so the legal rights to retain, to keep a copy forever, to reuse a work, to take it without permission and to reuse it as it was designed, to revise the work, to take it and change it, modify it, improve it, make it into a form that is useful to you and your students, to remix it, to take some of this and some of this from over here and maybe some of my work and mash it together and create something new. And then to redistribute any of those works, to share them with everyone across OpenMed, right? To do, these are all permissions. And to get these permissions, most people around the world use Creative Commons licenses. So this is where I work. My assistant director, Jenrin Wetzler, is on this call as well. She works there as well. And what Creative Commons does is that we create and steward the open licenses and some of the technologies that make it simple, easy, and legal to share educational resources, arts and culture, academic research, data, anything that can be copyrighted. You can put a Creative Commons license on it and share it under the terms and the conditions that you, the author, choose. And so we are a nonprofit organization. We're global. We create these open copyright licenses and a bunch of other things as well, which today we won't have time to go into all of our programs, but happy to talk about them another day. We've been around for 17 years. We do operate globally, and we have chapters around the world. And so something I'll talk about at the very end of the presentation is how to get involved with the Creative Commons Network if you'd like to. Creative Commons exists because before Creative Commons, there were these two polar extremes. There was public domain on the left side of the screen and all rights reserved copyright on the right. And so when I went to school, when we were chatting earlier about how I used to work in the College of Pharmacy at Ohio State University, when I was a professor there and I had my online course, my course was all rights reserved copyright. And I wanted to share. But really my only choice was to either let the work go into the public domain, which first meant I had to die, and then 70 years had to go by after my death for my work to go into the public domain. And I didn't want to die first. I wanted to share right away. The other option was for me or some lawyers to write a license to other people who wanted to access my works. Well, I was a graduate student. I had no money. I certainly didn't have a lawyer. And the lawyers at the university told me to go away, that I was bothering them. And so there was no easy way to keep my copyright and share these works. This, by the way, was before Creative Commons existed. So Creative Commons sits in this space that says keep your copyright, and if you want to share, whether or not your share is up to you, but if you want to share with others, if you want to share with the public, here is a way to do that where you can keep your copyright and add an open license to your work. So these are the different options or conditions that you can add to your copyrighted work. The first one is not an option. All of the Creative Commons licenses require attribution. Attribution in the Academy, we understand this. This is giving credit to somebody else. When we don't give attribution or when we don't cite somebody, that's plagiarism, and that's a big problem in the Academy. So attribution in Creative Commons methods, excuse me, providing attribution is just listing the title of the work, the author, the source or the URL, and the license. The other three conditions here are optional. Share alike says if you take my work and you modify it somehow, you have to share that same modified work forward under the terms that I licensed the original work under. So if you think about Wikipedia, all of the articles on Wikipedia are under an attribution share alike license. Non-commercial is what it sounds like. You can take my work, you can use it, but you may not use it primarily for commercial purposes, which essentially means you can't sell access to my work. No derivatives means you may not change my work, so you can't modify it. When you mix and match these different conditions, you get one of 6 Creative Commons open copyright licenses. So when somebody says CC BY or CC BY SA, this is what they're talking about. CC is Creative Commons, the BY is attribution, SA is share alike, NC is non-commercial, and ND is no derivatives. So when it comes to education and the open education movement, which is, probably closing in on 20 years old now, we proudly say we put the open in OER, because when you find open educational resources around the world, they tend either to be in the public domain or they have a Creative Commons license on them. There are many CC licenses around the world. These are conservative numbers. This is only what some of the big search engines can see, and they can only see the machine-readable Creative Commons licenses, which most people, frankly, don't use. And so we don't really know what the number is, but it's bigger than 1.4 billion license works on the web. So why is this important? Well, open licensing is important because they provide to the public perpetual, irrevocable permissions. So perpetual, they last forever. The work is available to the public until the copyright expires and the work goes into the public domain, and then it's still available to the public. So perpetual access to educational resources is important. Irrevocable means that those permissions cannot be pulled back by the copyright holder. So if Teresa is building her course and she's using a Creative Commons licensed work, and that author changes their mind and says, no, I don't want you to use it anymore, Teresa can still use it. She still has permission to use it in her course. And I think somebody's mic is open. You might check and just make sure that you're muted. Might have been somebody who just joined. So, to open educational resources, when we talk about OER, first, educational resources, we're talking about everything that we use in our classes, our degree programs. Okay, looks like it's Jordan's hand. Let's see if I can do it. So Jormana, I think your mic is open. Thanks. So it's all of the resources we use in our classes. When we're talking about open educational resources, we mean something very particular. We mean that everybody in the world both has access to use the work for free, and that they have permissions to modify the work in the way that they need to for their course, for their students. So permissions give us and our students free access. They eliminate the price barrier. They make this content affordable. And it lets us modify the work in the ways that we need to. And for those of you that are interested in and practice open education practices, this is really the exciting part of OER, or open content, is that when the content's open, we can engage in new ways of teaching and learning that it's hard to do so otherwise. This is the definition that we use at Creative Commons for OER. It's very similar to definitions that others use. Ours is actually a derivative of the UNESCO OER definition. And this is similar to the Hewlett definition. It's similar to what OECD uses. We all use about the same definition. They all contain these two elements. One is that everybody has free access, no cost access to the resource. And second, that they have the legal rights to modify the work and share it to meet their needs. So that's just a quick overview of OER, what it is, Creative Commons licensing. Let's get right into the Erasmus Plus open access requirement. And so this is actually linked here. Let me drop the link also into the chat window. So if you haven't, I'm sure you've seen this, but there's the link to the actual Erasmus Plus. And if you do a search on license, you'll find the information that I'm about to show. So the Erasmus Plus grants, as you all know, are these wonderful, huge amount of money in the European Union to support a variety of education projects. It's an amazing grant program. And in the requirements, there are many requirements for any grant program. And one of the many requirements in the Erasmus Plus grant programs is this open access requirement. And so I'm going to kind of walk through it, and then we're going to break it down and look at the parts and see what it means. And so they say that the Erasmus Plus promotes open access of project outputs to support learning, teaching, training, and youth work. Great. In particular, Erasmus Plus beneficiaries are committed, so committed, this is not an option, this is a requirement, to make any educational resources and tools that you produce in the context of projects supported by the program. So if you're using grant money to build any of this stuff, you're committed to share those resources freely for the public under an open license. So this first section is very clear. If you take our money and you build any of these things, documents, media, software, etc., you have to share those finished works freely at no cost with everybody, with the public, under an open license. They go on. The materials should be easily accessible and retrievable without cost or limitations. So think about when you start to share these works, how are you going to make it easy for people to get them? Usually you put them on a public website or on a public repository, and you make it easy to download the work in editable file formats. So that's important. The open license must allow the public to use, reuse, adapt, and share the resource. So now we're getting into which type of open license you might be able to use, because all of the Creative Commons licenses don't meet that requirement. We'll get to that in just a moment. Such materials are known as OER. We want you to upload them in an editable digital form. So why editable? Well, because if somebody downloads a PDF of your work, and they can't edit it or copy or paste because it's a locked down PDF, that's not very useful. And so we want to make sure that we're sharing editable digital files that are easy for other people to modify on a suitable, openly accessible platform. So again, get it up on a public repository or a public website somewhere where people can find it. It goes on to Erasmus Plus encourages beneficiaries to apply the most open licenses. And then they talk about what they mean by that. There's a footnote on this that says what we mean is a Creative Commons attribution license or a Creative Commons attribution share alike license, or I think they list the GPL doc license as well. So they get some examples of what they mean by most open licenses. Beneficiaries may choose, so they're giving you some choice of licenses that impose some limitations. For example, they will let you restrict commercial use. So if you want, on your grant, you can choose the non-commercial license, or commit others to apply the same license on derivative works. So what they're saying here is if you want to use the share alike license, you can do that too. So if this is appropriate to the nature and type of material. If it still allows the public to use, reuse, and adapt and share the resource. So they're emphasizing here, people have to be able to do with this resource what they need to do. Then they finish by saying the open access requirement is obligatory and without prejudice to the intellectual property rights of grant beneficiaries. So there's 2 points here. One is that this is a requirement. This is not optional. And second, we are not going to impose on your copyright. So the good news with Creative Commons licensing is you keep your copyright. So we're not imposing on your intellectual property rights. However, the grant does require you to share openly. So what I've done here is I've just broken it down into 3 slides. And we've kind of already gone over this, so I'll be very quick. The first point here is that this open license requirement is a requirement, and they're very clear about that. They say you're committed to share and how, and then at the very end they say this is obligatory. So they don't want there to be any confusion. This is not optional. This is something that as an Erasmus Plus grantee, you need to openly license what you've produced with grant funds. Why do they do this? Because the European Union has made a decision, both with their Erasmus Plus grants and with their academic research grants, that publicly funded resources should be openly licensed resources. And there's some logic here. When the public, when the taxpayers of the countries of the European Union pay taxes, and some of those taxes go to the European Commission for these grant programs, somebody in Spain paid taxes even though the grant went to Portugal, and somebody in France paid taxes even though the grant went to Germany. And so these resources need to be made available to people that paid for them and beyond. They're choosing public open licenses, so it's not limited to EU members. Of course, it's available to everybody in the world that wants to use the resource. So the next kind of blocks of text talk about open license options. So they say whatever open license you select, it must allow the public to use, reuse, adapt, and share the resource. And then they go on to say we encourage you to use the most open licenses, but it's got to allow these permissions that people can reuse, adapt, share, etc. And so as I've analyzed this open license requirement, and I think about the different options that Creative Commons offers, some of our licenses and public domain tools work and some don't. And the good news is that this set of licenses about what works and what doesn't work happens to be the same set that works and doesn't work for open educational resources in general. And so the green bar on the right from our public domain dedication, which gives up copyright and puts work directly into the public domain, all the way down here we've got CC BY, the Creative Commons attribution, by SA, attribution share alike, by NC, attribution non-commercial, and by NCSA, attribution non-commercial share alike. Those are all OER compliant licenses because they allow everybody in the world to retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute the resource. You can modify any of those in the way that you want to. What are not OER compliant and also are not compliant with the Erasmus Plus open license requirement are the no derivatives licenses. So why are the no derivatives licenses not compliant? Because they say that the public has to be able to reuse and adapt your resource that you're producing in the grant. And the no derivatives licenses don't let people adapt or modify the works and then share those modified works with others. And so the no derivatives works not only don't work for every major OER definition out there, they also don't work for the Erasmus Plus open access requirement. So what does this mean for you? What it means is when you're thinking about which license you want to put on the products of your grant, you need to be thinking about one of these in this green bar area. So all of those are compliant with the Erasmus Plus open access requirement. I would encourage you to try to be as close to the top of this list as you're willing to be. And the reason for that is that if you see on the left, it says most freedom to least freedom. What I mean by that is how much freedom, how much flexibility are you giving to other educators around the world? And if you put something in the public domain using CC0, then of course there's no copyright on it at all. And the practice is to still give you attribution. So that's the most open. Now most educators don't want to put their work in the public domain. They want to keep the copyright and put an open license on it. And so what's very popular is the CC BY license or the Creative Commons attribution license. All that's required on that license is that people give you credit. And then you can go down and add more conditions, share alike, non-commercial, or non-commercial share alike. Where those get a little bit tricky is in Remix. So if you're interested, and Jenrin, maybe you could drop in the link for the Creative Commons FAQ and directly to the CC Remix chart. Thanks. And so what Jenrin is going to share with you is which CC licenses can be remixed with other CC licenses. So for example, all of the academic content at MIT is under the BY NC-SA license. Everything at Wikipedia is under the BY SA license. You cannot take an MIT course and a Wikipedia article and remix them to where you can't tell where one starts and the other one begins. That would be a violation of the licenses because the share alike clause in each of those licenses says the new modified work has to be licensed under the same license as the original. And of course, the two originals started with different share alike licenses. So that's just one example where if you choose a more restrictive license, you're making it more complicated for other educators to revise and remix the work in the way that they might want to. That being said, all of these licenses and public domain tools in the green would work for the Erasmus Plus program. The last component of that I want to focus on is how do you share the OER that you're building? And they say, look, it needs to be digital. It needs to be editable. So you need to be sharing files which people can actually modify. So don't share. It's fine to share the locked down PDF of the article that you wrote, but also share it in a text file and share it in an ODT open office file, or share it in a Word document, or share it as a Google Doc, or pick something that other people can access and they can modify, because that's going to be helpful. And they're very clear about this. It needs to be editable. And how do you share it? You put it up on a public repository where there's no logins or passwords and people can just get access to it. Okay? Before I move to questions, just a few quick plugs for some things that we're doing at Creative Commons, and we want to invite you to join if you're interested. The first one, Jenrid, would you please just drop in the link for the CC network, network.creativecommons.org. Creative Commons has relaunched its global network. We have we've opened up the opportunity for everybody in the world to join. It is free. There's no membership fees. We're simply inviting people that work in the commons, that share their works openly, that are working in any sector of society where openness comes into play. You're welcome to join. You can join the global network as an individual. You can also have your institution join if they want to, but the real power is with the individuals. The other thing that we have in the network, and by the way, the reason people join the network is to be connected with others in the network. And then we also essentially group people in each country into chapters. So for example, everybody in Morocco that's signing up to be a member of the Creative Commons Global Network, Morocco will also put together a Creative Commons country chapter. And everybody that's in the network in Morocco who live in Morocco will be part of that chapter. And then Morocco will select a chapter lead, somebody who will help to set the agenda with everybody else. And they'll elect one person to represent Morocco on the Creative Commons Global Council. And so think about the Global Council like the United Nations General Assembly. Each country in the world gets one representative, and that council will help set the strategy and help decide how Creative Commons, what we do and how we spend our money. And so there's an opportunity there. We'd love to have you join. To join the network, you need 2 people to vouch for you who are in the network already. So you can see on our website everybody who's in the network, and you just need somebody to say, yes, I know Christina. She does great work. I know her work. I know her. You write a little short application for why you want to join, and then it's reviewed. In the network, that's what this slide is, we have these things called platforms. And these are not technical platforms. These are spaces of collaboration and of collective action. And so the Open Education Platform is something that Jenrin and I both help to run. And it's currently a group of about 755 people from around the world. I think we're up to 80 countries now. And we will be working on open education projects in OER, in open education practices, and in policy. Last thing I wanted to mention briefly is that we just launched the Creative Commons certificate. And Jenrin, maybe you could drop the link into chat so people could click on it as well. This is a program that Jenrin is running. And so if you have any questions about it, I'll let her answer those. This is a professional development or a training opportunity for everyone on becoming an expert in both Creative Commons open licensing and more broadly in the commons. It's currently a 10-week online course. It was we were excited. It was so popular when we launched it. We have sold out all of the seats for 2018. We will be launching new courses in 2019. So we hope that many of you are interested in taking this course, and then maybe some of you becoming instructors for the course as well. Of course, because we're Creative Commons, all of the content in the course is OER. It's all licensed CC BY. It's under a Creative Commons attribution license. And if you go to the website, you can actually download all of the content now. So you can take the content and do whatever you want with it. But if you want to be certified, you have to sign up and go through an instructor-led course with Creative Commons. So let me stop there. I chose a picture from Malta because we're having a discussion in the Mediterranean, and I'll pause and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cable. It's great to see you in the Mediterranean. So, thank you for this inspiring and very detailed presentation. I've seen. Well, for those of you who have questions, please be sure to type them in the chat box. There is a comment by pronunciation will be definitely wrong, but Jumana Dergam, and she said that talking about CC license to the outputs and the results of the Erasmus Plus project, sometimes the outputs are activities and are not tangible outputs. And since I'm here, I also share a couple of questions that we have received during the registration process, which are about the differences between the licenses, which have been widely covered during the webinar, and also a very practical question. So where should we mention that our material and results are open licensed?
Okay, let me take those one at a time, and I'm sure I'll miss something, and I'll ask you to repeat it. So first, for activities, you're right. If you do an activity, it's difficult to share the activity under an open license because it happened and now it's gone. That being said, most activities have artifacts that go with them. So for example, if I'm doing a training, that's my activity. I have a room full of people and we're talking with each other. I probably have an agenda for the meeting. Well, that's a copyrighted work that could be openly licensed and shared. There might have been a planning document for designing the meeting. That's copyrighted work and needs to be openly licensed under the grant. Maybe I took a video. Maybe the meeting was, or the activity was recorded. That's a copyrighted work that should be openly licensed. So even when you're running an activity, ask yourself, am I creating anything around the activity, or is the activity recorded in a way that would produce a resource? And if the answer is yes, and if you produced it with grant money, then the open license requirement applies to that. Okay, that was one question. What was the next one?
The next one is, where should we mention that our material is open license?
Where should that be mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a really good question. So let me use an example, and if you want to use a different example, we can. Let's use an example of let's use a complex example of a degree program. So let's just pretend that you got a grant, received an Erasmus Plus grant to build a new biology program for your project. The biology program probably has a landing page on a website at the university. It probably has a web page for the syllabus for the program on the front, and then the biology program has 25 courses in it. Each one of those courses has a home page, and then within each course there's a lot of content. And so where do you mark the work with a Creative Commons license? And there are a couple answers. One answer is you can very easily say, Jenren, maybe you could drop in the link for just the Creative Commons homepage would be helpful. And when Jenren shares this, if you scroll to the bottom of the Creative Commons page, what you'll see in the footer is it says, unless otherwise noted, all of the content on this website is under a Creative Commons attribution license. And so Creative Commons has lots of content, just like the biology degree program has lots of content. we don't mark each individual piece of content. We simply say, if you don't see anything marked, you can assume that it's under a CC BY license. And then when we use works on the Creative Commons website that are not CC BY licensed, we mark those works. Or if we're using works that are not ours and they're from somebody else, we give proper attribution and we list the proper title, author, source, and license of that work. And so when it comes to marking your work, and let me share a link here. So I'm going to share in the chat. This is called our CC marking page, or marking is putting a license on your thing, on your work. So you'll see there's two links on this page. One is marking your work with a CC license, which is what the question was. The second link is how do you provide attribution to others' work, which essentially means how do you mark their work when you use it in your work. And they're essentially the same, but slightly different. And if you go through, there's a long explanation and a lot of detail on that page that you can read later. But essentially what it says is on your work, you should put title, author, source, and license. And my advice to you is to do it at every level of your work. So using the example of the degree program, I would say on the homepage of your project, unless otherwise noted, this Erasmus Plus funded project is licensed under a Creative Commons, whichever license you choose. And then everywhere on all the different levels of your work, I would just create one attribution statement, and I would just copy and paste and put it on everything. So in the attribution statement, what's important that you have is the title, author, source, and license. And you can combine these things a little bit. So the source, or the URL, you can link the title. And so the title could be title and source because it's linked. The author is you or your university or whoever you want to receive attribution. And then the license is whichever Creative Commons license you selected. And you want to link the license to the CC license deed. So for example, let me show you what that looks like. And this is all on that marking webpage as well. But if, for example, you chose the CC BY license, you'd want to link it to the license deed. I just dropped the link in for there. And the reason you want to put good attribution statements on your work is so that when other people find your work and use your work, you've made it really easy for them to give you credit. And you deserve credit. You worked really hard on this. This is your project. And so that's just a good rule of thumb. Provide good attribution on your work, title, author, source, license, so that other people can give you credit and link back to you. Next question.
I've seen someone raising the hand. I don't know if you want to speak or type the question. Rania Najar has asked, shared a comment about the data collected at the end of an activity, which are used for publication. So would this be possible, I guess, also to openly share those data? And should the data collected be published as well? So she's talking about the raw data and not the result.
So that's a really
of the activity.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have to admit, I did not look for the open data requirements in the Erasmus Plus grants. I'd have to go do that research. Maybe you've already found it. I can tell you what the best practice is in the open access community around sharing articles, the research articles, and sharing the data for the research, or that was used to produce the research. And the best example that I can give you, hang on one second, I'll give you the link. So this is, I just put the link in the chat. This is the Gates Foundation open access policy. And at least today, it's really the best practice of an open access requirement for academic or for research and for data. And what they say for the article is zero embargo period, which means the moment the article is published, everybody in the world can get access to it for free. So there's no wait time, zero embargo. They also require a Creative Commons attribution license on the article itself. And the reason for that is so that any other researcher can do what's called text and data mining of the article. So, for example, my PhD is in education psychology. If I wanted to do an analysis of all of the articles that have been written in the past 50 years on constructivism, there's not enough time left in my life to read all of those articles. There's too many. And so what I would need to do is use a computer program to analyze and provide a report back to me about what I was looking for from those 100,000 articles. And when I do that, I'm making a derivative work and I'm implicating copyright. And so I actually need permissions to do that analysis. And that's why funders are starting to require Creative Commons licenses on the articles themselves. It's not so that other people can change or modify your finished article. That's not the reason. The reason is so they can text and data mine. And then as far as the data, you'll see in the Gates Foundation requirement, they also require that the research data be shared with the public. And the reason for that, the scientific reason for that is that it's one thing for somebody to read your article and your methodology and your conclusions, but it's a deeper level of analysis when they're able to actually get into your data and run the test again. And they might find that they might get different conclusions, or they might dispute your findings, or they might confirm your findings. But if they have access to your data, then that's really helpful in analyzing the research that you did. The other reason that data is critical is that, let's say that I'm doing research on curing pancreatic cancer. If I have access to the original research data of everybody's research that's working on pancreatic cancer, then my ability to study that just went way up, and as opposed to just reading articles. And so I don't know what the Erasmus Plus requirement on data is. You'd have to look. But the best practice is to share the data along with the research, and to share the data in editable file formats, and to dedicate the data to the public domain using CC0, public domain dedication. So data in most countries is not copyrightable. In Europe has something called database rights, which are copyrightable. And so to be very clear with the world that you want your data and the database that it's in to be open, the best practice is to use our public domain dedication called CC0.
Oh, yes, very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Cable. I know that you have a meeting, another meeting in like probably 10 minutes. So I think we can take like the last question if you are still available. So when talking about sharing openly, oops, I lost the question. Sharing openly the results of the project and the data, and also the data in some cases. Does this imply also publishing in open journals? I mean, restricting the publication to open journals.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Let me find the question again. So sharing openly, including open data, does that imply that publications should be restricted to journals adapting Creative Commons, let's say open access journals?
Good question. So, no, I don't think it should restrict you. So faculty and researchers should be able to publish in any journal that they want to publish in. And the journals that you publish in need to accommodate your wishes in terms of open licensing and of the articles and open data. And the good news is most journals, most major journals around the world have found a way to allow you to do that. So the first thing that you should do as an author is you should never turn your copyright over to a journal. You should keep your copyright. Don't give it to them. They're going to ask for it. They will give you a piece of paper and a contract that says that you have to give it to them. They will threaten you and say that you may not publish in our journal unless you give us the copyright. Your answer should be no. You should say, no, I will not give up my copyright to my research. I will keep it, and I will give you, the journal, the rights to publish, but I will keep the copyright. Now, one way to do that is with what's called an author's addendum. And there are several out there. The Authors Alliance, and Jenner, maybe you could drop some of these links in. Authors Alliance has one that Creative Commons helps to maintain. Another one is from Spark. Spark has an author's addendum, which is quite well used. But they all do the same thing, and that is to say, I keep my copyright, and I give you, the journal, some rights, not all of my rights, but I give you some rights to publish the work. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to keep your copyright and simply put a Creative Commons license on your work, and then you say to the journal, here, I've openly licensed my work to the world, including to you, to the journal, and you may republish my work under the terms of the Creative Commons license. And if you published under a BY or a BY SA license for the journal, that would work just fine. So that's another way to do it. Too often, though, we turn our copyright over to the journals, and then our education institution or our country cancels the journal subscription, and then it becomes illegal for us as faculty to use our own research in our own class, which is a terrible situation. So yes, as others have said, never ever give up your rights. That's right. Keep your rights. So the same thing is true of your data, right? So keep the rights to your article, keep the rights to your data, and share openly. So it's both things. Keep your rights, share openly, and if you encounter a journal that won't accept those terms, either say, look, these are my terms. You can publish or not publish. Usually they will say, okay, we still want to publish your work because that's the business that they're in, and they'll find a way. They won't like it. They'll complain about it, but they'll do it. Or if they don't do it, then find a different journal, to be totally honest. And the journals that don't comply with open access mandates are going to go out of business because most governments around the world and most foundations are now requiring some kind of open access requirement. And journals don't have a choice. They're going to have to find a way to comply with those requirements. Yes, DOAJ is a great resource. If you want to see, I'll share, or maybe you could also share the link to RoarMap. There's a great website that shows all the different institutional open access policies as well. Next question. By the way, I don't.
Okay, sure. I'm sure because yeah, there are many other questions. So in the context of Erasmus Plus, I'm not sure if I have understood this question, but in the context of Erasmus Plus, are there any copyrights? Oh, boo-boo. Could you, Jumana, rephrase your question, please? Because I think, yeah, I'm not sure if you're talking about the food program or the results of your projects. Of course, if you're talking about the results of your project, it's up to you to set the copyright. And yet many of the questions are very practical. So how can we attribute training contents and pictures which we, from online sources within our e-learning course materials, as an example? So I know that on the Creative Commons website, there are also good practices for attribution.
Right. So let's take each one of those in turn. So there is, let me share some links here. Let's see. So here, somebody asked, where do I find OER? Here is a link to our website where we've listed lots of different places to find OER by different categories of things. So we say, here's in general how you search the web for OER. Here's where you look for images. Here's where you might look for video. Here's where you look for courses. Here's where you look for parts of courses. And so that list might be helpful. If you have we're always updating this list. If you have some resources you'd like us to add, please send me an email and we'll update the page. Yes, the OER World Map is a great resource. It shows projects all over the world. As far as best practices in providing attribution, that was the CC marking page we were talking about earlier, so I will put that back in. So if you, and specifically, let me give the other link, providing attribution to works that you're using would be this link. Somebody asked about copyright. Let's be very clear. When you've received Erasmus Plus grant funding, you will be creating new things. Those new things that you're building are copyrighted, and you or your project or your university owns the copyright. And the requirement of Erasmus Plus says you must put an open license on those copyrighted materials and share them in the public in editable file formats, etc. And so that's copyrighted stuff. You also might have existing works that were not funded by Erasmus Plus that you want to use in your project. So that's quite common with grants. You have a choice there. Your choice is one choice would be to not openly license the existing work that you're using and just leave it all rights reserved copyright. You could do that. You also, as the copyright holder, could put an open license on those works as well. Erasmus Plus obviously can't require you to open up things that are old that they didn't fund, but they would appreciate it if you did. The reason that I would recommend you openly license anything that you use in your project, even if it's old things, is that when you share it, the rest of the world can only use the things that are openly licensed. So let's just pretend you're building a biology degree program, and what Erasmus has funded is 70% of the biology degree program, and 30% of it are things that you already had. if you then share the biology degree program with the world, what you are sharing is 70% of a degree program, and that's not very helpful to the university in Seville, Spain, because they don't want 70% of a degree program; they want the whole degree program. And so that's a choice that you'll have to make. I guess the third example of copyrighted resources is you might be looking for resources for your project. Using OER from other people's OER is great and recommended. If somebody else has shared something as OER and it's useful to your project and that saves you time and money and you don't have to build it, that's great. You should use that OER. And you are legally required to give them attribution. So you have to list on their OER that you brought into your project, title, author, source, and license. You might also find some free, all rights reserved copyright content on the web that you want to be part of your project. Now, you can't do that without permission. And so my recommendation to you would be to reach out, contact the copyright owner, and tell them, hi, I'm in Morocco. I have an Erasmus Plus grant. I'm building this. I found your content. I really want to use your content. Your content's great, but I can't use it because it's all rights reserved copyright. Would you please put a Creative Commons license on your work so that I can use it and then I can share it forward with my work? And sometimes people say yes, sometimes people say no. But my recommendation to you is to ask.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Good. Thank you, Cable, really, for sharing all those information and experience that you have, and for being such an enthusiastic person, and for contributing the Erasmus Plus project more relevant for everyone. So I think that we have covered all of the questions. It is also very interesting to know that Creative Commons will open registration for the certificates for 2019 in October or November. So we will keep an eye on the Creative Commons website. Cable, is there anything else you want to cover before we close the meeting?
Maybe just a few final points. So first, before I forget, I want to say thank you to the hosts and the organizers. This was I think, a really useful discussion. Open licensing policies like the one in Erasmus Plus are really important, but if they're not implemented, then they don't mean anything. And so this is an example of helping to understand and then implement an open licensing policy. So congratulations and kudos to our hosts for facilitating that conversation. I think that's really important. And it's a good example for other projects around the world that also require open licensing. So thanks to Christina and her colleagues for hosting. Second, on the Creative Commons certificate, we will be opening spaces in the online courses for 2019. We also, let me just stop and turn it over to Jenrin. Jenrin, could you talk a little bit about the opportunities in 2019?
Sure. So I posted in the chat that we'll be opening registration for our 2019 courses later this fall. For those of you who don't have the same seasons as us, we'll likely do this in October or November. Other options that will open up in 2019 include a scholarship program that we are working to make possible now, so stay tuned for that. We'll also be offering an in-person version of our online courses. That would be a week-long course for folks that want to get a small group trained up. So we're calling these boot camps. Those will be available also in 2019 upon request. We're going to start working on translation, but we likely won't have translation of the course into different languages complete in 2019, but we'll certainly have updates. And then in addition, we're working on expanding the course offerings to new audiences, including our GLAM institutions. So galleries, libraries, archives, and museums may have a CC certificate course ready to test at the end of 2019. We'll also be working on some certificate courses for additional audiences, but we have no definitive date yet for those. But as always, we're very eager to work with all of you and other folks within our global network. And if you see ways that we can make our certificate improved, we welcome your thoughts and feedback. We, as I posted in the chat space earlier, we've shared the CC BY licensed resources for anyone to access now. Also on the web page is it's a web application that allows the public to annotate resources. So it's called Hypothesis, and you are actually able to go in and add your own feedback or ideas right now in our course, which we would then start to review and integrate relevant feedback into future courses too. But we'll have other opportunities for engaging with you and thinking through how we can offer more localized case studies and examples in the future. And we really look forward to keeping this dialogue going as we expand the CC certificate and include more members of the community in these lessons. So thank you.
Thanks, Jenrin. The last thing I'll say is that please reach out to us if we can ever do anything to support any of you at your institutions or in your countries. Creative Commons, as we mentioned, has teams all over the world. And if we don't have a chapter in your country, we probably have a chapter in the country next to yours. And people could travel and come and give a presentation or speak in local languages and meet your needs. If you have opportunities for open licensing policies at your institutions and you need some help with writing those or talking with your administrators, that's something we do all the time. So if there's anything that we can help with, please let us know. That's another reason, frankly, to join the Creative Commons network and the Open Education platform, is it gives you easy access to not only us at Creative Commons headquarters,
Yes, I was muted. I was saying thank you very much, Cable, for all those opportunities, and it is also great to be in contact with all the colleagues who are facing the same Erasmus Plus adventures during this period. So thank you, Cable, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you being here. As I have announced before, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the OpenMed website, and we'll also drop you a line with the link. So I wish you, everyone, a successful continuation of your projects, and let's hope to see more resources openly available from all the Erasmus Plus projects in the Mediterranean. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye. Ciao, Cable.